Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Geo and Joey show. Joey, how you doing? And let the audience know what we're going to be discussing in this first segment.
Well, I'm doing better than I deserve by the grace of God.
Amen.
And this week we're going to be discussing kind of the issue of pendulum swinging, I think is a good way to say it, and how we do need a degree of a pendulum swing, but how there is some dangers. Um, there can be dangers in overcorrections, and so we'll kind of talk about that.
Okay, well, let's dive right in because, pendulum swings and overcorrections can happen in any walks of life. I'm big into fitness. I've seen people do that where they go from an unrestricted diet that made them gain weight and become unhealthy to then they go overly restrictive and then they're miserable. And so life has to be a balance. What particular aspect of this overcorrection are we going though on the Geo and Joey show today?
Yeah, well, before we jump into that, I just want to say like some examples of this, or example of this that like
Hmm.
stuck to my mind, right? In other words, we've talked before on the podcast about some ways where we think Donald Trump maybe, or at least some groups that are trying to push Trump in certain policy directions, maybe pushing for an overcorrection in some ways. But what I would say about that is the fact is, right, regardless of my feelings about Donald Trump, in 2016, most, like, none of the traditional political figures were talking about, say, the plight of people in middle America who are dying of opioids. And Trump talked about. Now, I don't think he really offered solutions to that problem, but he acknowledged it, and people gravitated to that because it was affecting their families, right? Like, it's a massive problem. And when nobody was talking about it, people would go and gravitate to the guy who does. And so I think that was an example of something, somebody who correctly saw an aspect of the problem and yet wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, the best choice, but and that was just kind of an example. And so the other thing is with, and this is what the clip is going to, that we're going to show, is going to get into, but with some of the sexual degeneracy and stuff that you and I have talked about on the podcast before. Um, Outrage from our tribe, right, which is the political right and conservatives and Christians, but not everything that could be done to correct the problem through law is necessarily going to be a good idea. So that's kind of what I was thinking on that.
Okay, all right, brother. Well, you want to dive into because this video you sent me is kind of nuts. And so,
Very nice.
yeah, all right. So you want to
It
show
does
it
seem
and,
to
and
be back again.
and we'll go from there.
Sure.
All right, here we go. So do you want me to play the video or just look at the tweet?
We can play the video and then we can look at Andrew's response.
Okay, all right. So let me set up the video first then. All right. Ready? This is crazy, man. This world is getting nuts. So you let the audience know what we're watching here.
What makes me special? Come on! Come on! Do you know what makes me special? I'm a queer. And I'm a witch! And I love art. I love drama. I love theater. I'm going to give you a show. I forgot the rest of your question because I'm dissociated.
All right, so let me ask you several questions about this shenanigans here, because I guess you're more in tune of the craziness that's going out there. Um, where are they? Like, who's giving these people an audience that they can be interviewed? Like, who are these two individuals, and what audience are they
Yeah, so I've seen the
addressing?
clip floating around, and I believe, I could be mistaken, but I'm fairly certain it's part of it was at the Eurovision recently contest in Europe, which is which is like it's kind of like a European version of like American Idol or
Okay.
those kind of like contestant shows. And the reason why I'm pretty sure it was that is because I saw someone was talking about, and it just sort of shows the contrast in our culture. There was
Hmm.
an Israeli singer who
Yes,
sang,
I saw
she was
that.
dressed normally and she was
Hmm.
singing a normal song, being normal. And simply because she was Israeli, like massive protests broke out. Like Greta Thunberg, the "How dare you, girl," was there to like protest the fact that Eurovision was having on this Jewish Israeli woman because they are against the the politics of the state of Israel and in the war. And yet these people were there, right? Literally like summoning demons, and that arose is there's no protests in Europe for that. There's no why is Eurovision allowing this, right? A Jew, you happen to be Israeli, don't even know your politics, and that's just beyond the pale. But
Well,
the
I
demon,
mean, to tie it into a little scripture here, it just we're living in a time where I like to say, even though it's an Old Testament book, it's kind of let us know that we're living in that time. And it's the book of Judges, right? And the refrain in the book of Judges, or kind of one of the themes in the book of Judges, is that everybody did what was right in their own eyes, right? And we see this kind of shenanigans because these people are not normal. I don't care what you say. Forget the fact that she mentioned that she's a witch. Just the way they're dressed, the markings and the corns coming out. How do we accept that as normal mental behavior is beyond me. Thoughts on that?
well, first of all, I have to admit I got a good chuckle just the way she set that up. She was like, I'm queer and I'm a witch," and then she calmed down. She's like, "I like art." And I'm just like, I don't know, that I just found that a little humorous. But I actually think I might have to push back on you a little bit. I
Hmm.
think that this is normal, right? In other words,
The new normal?
well, not even the new normal, the old normal. In other words, we in the West, and this will kind of get into the conversation
Hmm.
with Andrew's tweet, but we in the West for all of your lifetime, all of my lifetime, right? Like our parents, like we've lived obviously not on a because there's no perfection, but we've lived in a society generally shaped by certain like Judeo-Christian
Hmm.
values, right? And what we forget is before this, right, there was pagan societies, right, who, right, think of, the people who 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago were on North America, right? And think of the
Oh
mass
yeah,
graves with like human skulls. So this
yeah.
is
The Salem,
normal in that.
Salem witch hunts and all that. But I was talking about in our lifetime. I mean, I grew up in the '80s, and if you snuck around to listen to underground rap, that was considered countercultural. Now, I mean, they play that music or any kind of wild music. This wasn't normal in the '80s and '90s. I mean, you would get ostracized for this kind of stuff, and now here we are, giving it center stage. In the example you use, I saw the little clip of the Jewish singer. I mean, she's dressed elegant and like in a long, you know, like formal dress, and they booed her. I wasn't able to finish it because I was with my children, but it's sad. It's sad, and people think that their feelings are the arbiter of what's right and wrong, and so they let everything go. And people don't call them out on that because they don't want their feelings called out. But hey, there's right and wrong, and this is definitely wrong. And anybody wants to come on the show and dispute it, let me know. We'll drop a link on Twitter right now. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, no, I agree. And here's the thing: the quote that we love quoting on this show, right? Our
Mm-hmm.
Constitution was made for moral and religious people, and is wholly inadequate for governance of any other. Shout out to Johnny Adams,
Yeah.
uh, base number two. Um, and the thing I would say about that, and I think the underrated part, and maybe we'll have to in another episode we'll have to do like a breakdown of Revelation 13. But I'll just
Yes.
for right now I'll just give the audience like the short stuff. So, like we believe right in Bible prophecy, right, and we believe that in the end times, right, ultimately everyone is going to turn against God's people, right? And freedom is going to be lost, right, in the West and around the world. And a lot of times when people, like when some people, when preachers or Christian preachers are talking about the loss of freedom, they talk about it from the perspective of what the leaders want to do to the people, right? What the leaders are planning to do, right? And it's this conniving conspiracy. And there may be some of that, but lately my view has really been, in other words, tyranny is going to come because law and order and because civil society has so broken down, right? Anarchy has reigned supreme, and tyranny is going to seem like the only logical solution, right? It's not going to be, obviously it's wrong to tyrannize people, but it's not going to be like some like malevolent intent. It's just going to be like, oh, well, of course we have to seize tyranny, right? Of course, because these people can't govern themselves. And so we just have to grab their ends, right? Constitution be damned, right? Natural rights be damned. We're just going to grab the power and enforce it. And so those of us that obviously we know at before Christ comes, we will lose liberty, but we still believe in standing for it. And those of us that stand for it, I think it becomes all the more important to urge personal revival, right? Not at the point of a sword or a gun or a legislation necessarily. In some things, right? Like I said, the second tablet, but generally speaking, the law isn't going to fix the problem, the spiritual malaise that's descended over the West.
You know, you talked about people pushing for oppression of tyranny in the name of good. You send me a video. Do you want to play it? Of that
Sure.
pastor? Yeah. But before we do that, I want to, for the audience, continue to elaborate on that John Adams quote. Here, I looked it up on ChatGPT. Right? Our
Oh,
Constitution.
you're going to our future robot overlords.
Yeah, I know. Our Constitution was made only. Now, pay attention to these prophetic words, basically. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And so the key phrase to me is only moral and religious, because we see so many government officials. As a matter of fact, a couple of months ago in Hawaii, they were discounting, some politicians were discounting the Constitution as saying the power of the people rules over the Constitution. And we see so many Democrats, really, and even Republicans who don't understand the Constitution and want to mix church and state, that the Constitution is there to protect us from each other, right and left, and right versus right, and left versus left. If we abandon that, which we are, because we're no longer necessarily a moral and religious people, religion is, going down the drain. We're headed toward dark times, but like you mentioned early, not a surprise. Revelation 13 and 14 indicated that. But before we dive into that video, what about that quote really captures you?
Yeah, well, I think it's the basis, right? In other words, I'm all like, listen, I'm a constant, like, if I had to define my politics, like, obviously I say I'm a conservative, and I am, but like, what is it that I'm conserving? Because there's different strains, right? Way political philosophers have generally distinguished things. They'll talk about, American conservatism, right? And then they'll talk about continental European conservatism. And one difference is, so European conservatism, there is a kind of blood and soil nationalism, in the sense that, like what Ronald Reagan said, you can move to France, but you can never become a Frenchman. You can move to England, but you can never become an Englishman, right? And because these countries actually do, and it's a legitimate argument, there is an ethnic component to these nations. Where in America, that's never been the way. America has been a creedal nation, in the sense that, listen, these were, yes, mostly British colonists, right, who were trying to preserve a British way of freedoms and a political system that had been developing in Britain, but it was very much based on these ideas of inalienable rights endowed upon human beings by their creator. And guess what? A black human being and a white human being are equally endowed. Now, America hasn't always lived up to its highest ideals, but those ideals have always been there, right? And so, and really, the guy who was best at linking the Declaration with the Constitution was Abraham Lincoln, because he was like, his whole thing he was saying, he's like, listen, the Declaration is the animating spirit behind the Constitution. That's where, like, yes, the Constitution lays out the nuts and bolts of what our rights are, and how our government is to operate. But the Declaration is the motto in a way. This is the aspirational document. So
Yeah. Well, look, before we dive into that, C.S. Lewis had an article that I always thought was quite prophetic as well, before we dive into this video. And it's called The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, critiques a humanitarian approach to criminal justice, which emphasizes, ready, rehabilitation over retribution. And so that is very important, because imagine if you steal something, right? If you steal something, and let's say on the books it says for stealing this, you get 6 months in jail, right? Once you served your 6 months, whether you are rehabilitated or not, you've paid your debt to society and you're free to go. Correct? Right? But the humanitarian view of punishment says, no, we're going to keep you until you are rehabilitated. But who gets to decide if you're rehabilitated? So in other words, they can keep you in indefinite. And so when people are claiming, and going to the video, that they want to right the nation, or they want to correct the nation based on Judeo-Christian principles, and blurring the separation of church and state, then the natural question becomes, whose church is going to run the nation? Do you want to live by Episcopalian rules, by Jehovah's Witness rules, by Mormon rules, by Catholic rules, right? And so that becomes blurring the lines as we opened up the show. And so this next speaker, I don't know him too well. You know him better than I do. I think is headed, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he has good intentions, but he's headed down the wrong way. Here we go.
We're degenerates. We're not even close to, we're degenerates. The Constitution is not suited for governing degenerates. For governing degenerates, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, if you agree, disagree. But I think for our population that is degraded morally and culturally, and religiously, as far as we have, you need power. Men must be governed. you need a Caesar type, Now, if you're asking me my preference, that would probably be my preference, would be a constitutional republic. But I think the conditions for that is a moral people. So I think you can work towards that in the future. But I don't think, constitutioning even harder is going to get us out of our current, mess. I don't see us getting out of this apart from things getting worse and worse. And then eventually, like a Caesar type rising through the ranks, a populist, figure, and the people, the political will, the people are desperate and they're like, yes, do it. So and then so and so, Constitution be damned, just rules with an iron fist, and like a Cromwell type, and then you hopefully don't get his son. Maybe then you're able, and then you maybe it's just a one generation, one guy kind of thing, and then you have to move back to aristocracy or some other form.
So what are the things, well, let the audience know exactly who that is, and what are some of the things that concern you?
So I just pulled up his Twitter. I'd known who he was, but I've seen him around. He's kind of one of these guys. I like to call him the the pugilistic preachers of X. But his name is Joel Webben. He's a pastor. This is what his bio says on Twitter. It says doctrinal statement. So he's reformed, confessional, right, and post millennial. I think, and that is the part that I want to come back to that, because I think that view of eschatology plays in to some things that I do believe are dangerous. But the biggest thing, and first I want to preface that not all people who are Christians, like evangelical Christians who believe in postmillennialism, is dangerous. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that there is a view of government that can be dangerous if you have this postmillennial view. So the big thing that I would say about the clip there is he starts with a partial truth, right? In other words, here's the thing: we are degenerate, right? You and I have talked about this show multiple times, right, about degenerate things in our culture that we are opposed. We're opposed to the slaughter of millions of children since 1973 in Roe versus Wade, right? We're opposed to a lot of the sexualization, all of the sexualization of children that we're seeing across the country. Like, there's many things to be opposed to. And so he's right to call those things out. And he's even right to say that the constitutional protections they're not going to hold as well when you have an immoral people. That's, again, going to Adam's point. But where it becomes, I think, and I think all of us can fall into this, right? This idea that we're degenerate and therefore we're going to have some sort of Caesar, and in a generation, right, because of political machinations, that's just going to change, right? And then we're going to be able to somehow get the constitutional protections back. And I don't think that's realistic with history, right? First of all, the American freedoms that we have, those are the rare new thing in the world. The idea that anything that comes after is going to be anywhere close to what we had in this country, it would be ridiculous. But then again, that goes to the postmillennialism, right, where this is a view of eschatology that believes that before Jesus comes, Christians are going to, right, they're going to get the right kind of rulership. They're going to start the kingdom of God on earth, and they're going to have 1,000 years of peace and harmony, and then Jesus is going to come. And I just think that's, in a strange way, it's kind of the inverse of, it's like a right-wing version of like all the left-wing utopian movements of Marxism, right? Marxism believes that if we have the violent revolution, we have the workers' revolution, we overturn the evil capitalist class, right? Then, we'll usher in the new system and everyone will be equal and we'll have this radical egalitarian utopia. How did that work? And I think that's, in my view, I am fundamentally opposed to utopianism, right? There will never be a perfect state this side of heaven. In fact, things are only going to get worse, right? There's not going to be 1,000, spoiler alert, there's not going to be 1,000 years of peace and prosperity on earth, right? Jesus Christ is coming. He's right now in the process, or soon to be in the process, of separating the wheat from the tares, the sheep from the goats. He's going to come, bring his people home, right? That's what we should, and so what we should be focused on, preserving the liberties, the constitutional liberties that we have as long as we can, which is, again, another reason why I'm just going to be come out against Joel's moves here. And secondly, we need to be working for revival in our churches. Maybe if we spent, like 80% less emphasis on Washington and, put that emphasis on our local churches, you'd be surprised the impact we can make in individual people's lives. But I think sometimes when and again, I like politics as much as a nice guy. I do think politics is important. But if we get into that mindset, we can start to think of society as a whole, right? And who can fix society as a whole? But I'll tell you what you can do. You can make a difference in some youth, some troubled youth in your community by showing up and caring for them. You can make a difference for a teenage girl who's pregnant and scared and doesn't know what to do. You can make a difference for an elderly person who's on food stamps in your community. You can do those things, right? And so I guess that was some of my pushback. Sorry about the rant.
Hey, don't worry about it. Ranting is good. Ranting is good when you're passionate about it. No, my concern with that is that he's looking for a strong man, and that sets people up for giving up their individual and autonomy, their individual right of liberty of conscience, right? I don't want some person dictating, because even if somebody I 100% agree with, well, you're never going to 100% agree with everybody. Even if it was somebody from my own denomination or from my own friends, I don't want anybody dictating. What we want is liberty, and let persuasion persuade the masses, not forcing it down people's throat. And the notion of a strong arm, giving up power, if that was the case, let's say somebody came to power like a dictator here in the United States. You think they're going to give that up? You know what they say about power, right? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. No one's going to want to give that up. And so if that should ever happen here in the United States, there's no going back to a constitutional republic, right? It would just be dictatorship, because nobody, unless we have another revolution, but then they would say that the Constitution didn't work the first time and something else would try to replace it. Look, I'm a huge supporter of the Constitution, and one of the biggest things is to keep church and state separate. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and like I said, and we've done other episodes on that, on what that actually means, because there's obviously some people say, well, that just means a totally secular public square.
Nope.
Obviously, we've debunked that. It's establishmentarianism. That's what we're opposed to. Yes, your religious convictions should affect your politics. They affect mine. Part of the reason why I so adamantly believe in religious freedom is because I believe that, yes, I believe that Jesus Christ is who he said he was. That is who you should worship. But guess what? He made you in his image. He made your Hindu neighbor in his image. And so, yes, your Hindu neighbor, listen, if I was getting the chance to evangelize to your Hindu neighbor, I tell them, listen, you need to, for the sake of your own soul, you should repent and you should follow Jesus. But guess what? Because he's made in the image of God, God has granted us reason, and he's granted us free will, right? If God would not just automatically squash out Lucifer at the first hint of rebellion because he cared about this principle of free will, then who the heck are you or me or Joel Webbin or anyone to go against that, right? And so, like I said, yes, when it comes to the second tablet of the Ten Commandments and man's relationship with man, we need just laws, right, that are in accord with the natural law, right, that help our society run harmoniously and restore public order. But when it comes to anything related to worship, you're not going to get out of our mire with some strong man. And just another point, how do we remember strongmans in history, right? How many cities in America are named after Julius Caesar? No, you know who we name our cities after? We name them after George Washington, after now I'm
well, while you're trying to think up of that other name, what's a beautiful story of George Washington is they wanted to make him kind of like a king, and he stepped down. He was like, no, that's not what this is not what we fought for, right? They wanted him to continue in office, to kind of make him like the first king of the United States. And he said, nope, we're not doing that. Why? Because our founding fathers understood the importance of liberty of conscience, religious freedom. And while you're looking up whatever quote you're looking up, I want to put this up, right? Which is from, once again, Ben Franklin. I love this. It says, when a religion is good, I conceive that it would support itself. And when it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one. When the church has to appeal to Caesar, run. Run far away. Find yourself a church that appeals to the God of heaven, the maker of heaven and earth. That's who we have to appeal to. And no matter how bleak it gets into the United States, do not fall into the temptation that we need the government to correct the morality of the people. What we need is a revival. Did you find what you were looking for, Joey?
So I was the name that blinked, and I feel kind of dumb, but it was Cincinnatus, right? And but my point was, we have cities named after men like Cincinnatus, a man who the people, right, like he called on to fill the office of dictator and people in that time, and the thing is, he could have stayed in power, but he left it, right? And then Washington has been called America's Cincinnatus, right? The man, like you were saying, right? He is the one man in American history who could have been the American monarch. He could have rode into Philadelphia on a white horse, and it wouldn't have been a violent revolution, right? He would have received the crown with thunderous applause, but he chose not to. And these are the men, and I think rightfully, that we remember as heroes, right? We don't have, like I said, we don't have Caesar Natty, right? We don't have so I don't know. That's my thing. Is
wow, we don't have Hitler. We don't have Hitler Boulevard and Mussolini Way. You know what I mean? All these bad dictators and stuff. And so obviously we preserve freedom. Going back to that earlier video though that we showed with those two crazy people, there was a person who responded to that on Twitter that you know, and I'll put it up so the audience can see. Tell us about this guy and what do you think of his tweet there?
Yeah, so I agree with his tweet. And the reason we wanted to have the conversation we had before that is because we want to frame that in the context of the fact that either way, there are dangers that you can fall off on. But now that we've framed that, I agree with what Andrew Walker is saying. Andrew Walker is a seminary professor at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's an ethics and public policy guy. And I highly recommend his books, actually. And actually, I recommend his writing on religious freedom, because many of the things that we talk about, he's actually outlined very well. But going back to that tweet, I'll just kind of read it.
Hold on, real quick. We got to take advantage. If somehow, some way he's listening, we'd love to have him on the show. Even though we're not from the same denomination, obviously we respect, we're big proponents of religious liberty. So if somebody knows him, Andrew T. Walker, send them an invite, bring him on the show. We'd love to have him.
Awesome.
Go ahead. You were saying, though? I didn't want to cut your thought off, but I didn't want to.
So I was just going to read, if you could put the tweet back up.
Yeah.
I was going to read it real quick. Yeah, so it says, and this was on that video that we shared, it says, the West can choose between the chaos below or Christ. It is that simple. Christ or chaos, always. Choose Christ and live humanly. Choose chaos and live in perpetual deformation, defined by degeneracy, psychosis, and ugliness.
You know, and there's so much to say here. Go ahead.
But I was just going to say, it's true. It's factually and objectively true, right? And it's the principle that, right, like, here's the thing. If you live out of accordance with the truth, that's always going to be bad, right? How Christians have seen it, right, or described it throughout the centuries, right? The transcendentals, right? Truth, beauty, and goodness, right? And you can't have one of them without the others, right? Like, beauty without truth isn't really beauty, right? Like, you can have all sorts of things that are appealing to some lower appetite, but it's not true beauty if it's not in accord with the truth and if it's not in accord with goodness. And so I 100% agree with Andrew here. But the point is, and I think the key word in his tweet is choose. Choose, right? And because here's the thing, and this is where the free will aspect comes here. If, say, you were to get some, like Pastor Webben wants, right, some Christian Caesar, and he was to enforce the dictates of religious worship, you would still have chaos, because that's not Christ's way, right? So yes, I can say this degeneracy over here on the left, that's bad, right? But if we then get that morality at the point of the sword, it ceases to be moral because no one's choosing that. You can correct behavior, right? You can, sort of get some good behavior at the point of a sword, but you can't change a heart, right? And what our society needs is people who imbue Christian virtue, right? Who have the indwelling Christ living within them. And so it would still be chaos, right, if we then had a Christian government, but not Christian people. I did a podcast a while ago for Daily Wire, the Daily Wire Friends channel, and the show that our friend Dennis hosts. And something he said there that I think has really stuck with me is he said Christian nationalists, they want Christian institutions, Christian laws, Christian politicians, Christian displays. He says it seems like they want everything but Christian hearts and Christian people. And it's like
Mercy.
that wouldn't be a Christian society.
Mm-hmm. No,
And
and that is
I don't think that's what, giving full benefit of the doubt, I do not believe that's what Walker is advocating for. Like I said, I followed him for a long time, and I think he actually gets what we're saying about church and state.
yes, and that's good to hear. Like I said, I don't know him. We'd love to have him on the show. But when you look throughout Scripture, for example, it always boils down to that, to worship, right? You look at Adam and Eve; they chose to worship the serpent by obeying the serpent instead of obeying God. The very next chapter, Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother Abel over worship because his type of worship wasn't accepted. You go to Noah and the ark, right? They were worshiping the wrong God. They were not worshiping God. A flood came, destroyed them. Only Noah survived. You go, and then you fast forward, right? The Pharisees picked to follow their own interpretation of religion instead of the very Messiah the Bible prophesies, and they crucified Jesus. There's a unique story where Herod and Pilate were enemies until the crucifixion of Jesus, and they became friends there. Kind of an allusion to the mixture of church and state. And then you get to Revelation 13 and 14, right? Where unless you follow the beast and worship him, you're going to get them, you're going to be threatened with death. And so at the heart of all these conversations and at the heart of what we have to fight against is this notion of forcing people to act a certain way, especially when it comes to worship. You don't want to dictate worship. We don't want to dictate worship. We want to persuade people. And going once again to the quote I had there of Ben Franklin, here it says, when a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself. And when it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one. And so it's a constant reminder to us, do not fall for the temptation of appealing to Caesar to get us out of the moral decay that we are in as a country. Thoughts on that, Joey?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I wanted to make this practical, so I sent you another thread that we can pull out. But I think it's important to talk about this then practically in what that should mean, right? Because some people have turned to me, right, who share my concerns about Christian nationalism, share my concerns about this idea of molding the church power and the state power together, right? They share my concerns and they say, so then why do you even engage in politics at all, right? If you believe that Jesus is coming soon, right, why engage at all? And I think, for one, because ultimately I believe it's soon. I believe we look at the signs. No one knows the day or the hour. And so if he doesn't come if it's 30 years, right? Well, am I going to not stand for, justice now, right? Like, here's the thing. My parents, right, were alive, in the civil rights era, right? And guess what? There were people they believed in their day that Jesus was coming soon, and he was coming soon in their day, right? But guess what? It's been a lot of years. What if Christians, right? And unfortunately, not enough did, but a lot did. What if the Christians would stood with Dr. King against racial segregation and said, "Listen, let's not fight for that, right? Yes, racism is wrong, but let's not fight for that because Jesus is coming soon and he'll sort all this out." Well, that would have been wrong because guess what? Not treating your black brothers and sisters as full image bearers of God, that was wrong. And so it doesn't matter if Jesus is coming in 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years, you should still stand for what's right. But there's a way and a process and how to do it. And I think going to what I was saying before about rejecting utopianism, whether it's the post-millennial kind of Christian version or whether it's Marxism or communism or the left-wing utopianism, is we fight for better on this earth. We never, but we fight for better with the knowledge that we'll never get best. And if we do that, right, if we're advocating for good policies, just policies, and we achieve a slight win, we can be happy because we know better is the best that we get here.
Yeah, and look, we're not going to abandon ship. And the reason we're not going to abandon ship, especially when it comes to politics, is that we love the country and we love the people. Remember, politics is not about parties, it's about people. And whatever people we can persuade to seek after truth, it doesn't necessarily have to be what I believe exactly, but if the spirit is there, right? The spirit of seeking after truth and standing up for truth no matter what. As I like to say, even if the heavens may fall, it's that's why we stay in politics. That's why we stay and have a voice, right? Because whoever we can implant a seed of wanting and desiring to seek for truth, that's what we're after. And so we just can't abandon the public square. Christians need to be in the public square. What we cannot do is try to force others into our camp. We need to persuade them into our camp. So you send me some more texts.
Real quick on something you said I really agreed with, and I think it's a point that needs to be made more, is what you said there about loving the people, loving your people. Like, yes, we should, first of all, we should love everyone. But here's the thing. You do have a special love for your wife that you don't have for other people. You have a special love for your kids that you don't have. Now, you value all kids. All kids are equal value for God. But you have a special relationship with your kids. And I think you can extend that to the polis, right? To the city in where you live, to the state where you live, and to your country. And there's nothing wrong. And this is what I think true patriotism is. Yes, it's a commitment to the ideals upon which our country was started, but it's also a love of your fellow Americans, right? As like this extension of your family, of your city, right? And I was almost 5 years old when 9/11 happened. It's one of my favorite public memories, right? I remember my mom turning on the news, right? I remember seeing the plane. I remember, and turned it off shortly after, but I remember seeing people jumping. And I remember having the thought, wait a minute, those are Americans, right? I'm an American. These are my people, right? And I think I love this quote that Andrew Klavan has said often in his show. He's like, listen, the ship of liberty may sink, right? The American Constitution may go down, but the last darn thing you're going to see as it sinks below the icy waters of authoritarianism is my cold hand, dead hand grasping the ship, right?
Oh, that deserved an applause, brother. No, you're right. And I can't believe you were 5 years old at 9/11. I was 27, brother. Jeez. So let's look at these other tweets you sent me. So why'd you want me to bring these up? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think and this is Ryan Anderson, another great. He's Catholic, but he's another great advocate for actually religious freedom, for constitutional norms, but also for a balanced Christian approach to politics. And I wanted to bring this because he's going to go to the specific issue of abortion. But I think this specific issue can illustrate something about the broad issue we've been talking about, right? Because again, there are these Christians who think we just need, a Christian Caesar, like we were getting at the beginning, to right the ship, right? Or we just need more governmental power to do the right things and whatever. And here's the thing. There's two problems with that in my view. The first is I think that arbitrary use of power without limits is immoral. It's wrong. It's not Christ-like, right? But then also, that kind of power promotes a backlash. It promotes resistance. It promotes anger and distrust. And I think the pro-life community, a community that I'm 100% behind and support, right, have my whole life, I think that there's a split. And since Roe versus Wade has been overturned, we've had, that was this highlight, right? This thing that we've been waiting to happen for a long time. But since then, in ballot initiative after ballot initiative, the people have come out against us. They've come out against children. And like every time in Michigan, we had Prop 3 that passed, right? That basically put abortion into our state constitution. And I was thinking about that as there's a lot of people who voted for these initiatives who aren't big lovers of abortion. But what we've seen time and time again is that people don't trust Republicans and conservatives on this issue. They do think that they're going to have this heavy hand that comes down after young girls who have been in bad situations, who have been raised by a culture to believe that this evil thing, is right. And so they don't trust conservatives, and so they're reacting against that. But I loved this thread that you can put it back up, and I'll start reading through it, because I think it balances this key thing. It's like because it goes to the need of conservatives and of pro-lifers to win the people, right? To actually persuade them, and that's what the Christian voice in the public square can do if we actually have the Spirit of Christ and we love those who disagree with us, who are our fellow citizens. So I'm just going to start reading this because I think it's just really.
Go ahead.
So Ryan T. Anderson he says, my contribution to the First Things Mag Symposium, Pro-Life Politics After Dobbs. Pro-lifers after Dobbs need to take moral and political reality seriously. The moral reality is clear. Elective abortion is the unjust killing of a human being and should be prohibited. The political reality is harder to stomach. A majority of Americans, though ambivalent about abortion, think that elective abortion should be legally permitted at least in the first trimester of pregnancy, and will vote for a radically permissive regime of law if they think the alternative is a complete prohibition of abortion. What's more, political elites in the so-called pro-life party are frequently insincere in their pro-life commitments and unwilling to provide the leadership needed to shift public opinion. And few in the donor class are willing to spend real money on the pro-life cause. Fortunately, since Dobbs, pro-life politicians who have stood firm have fared well in elections. In fact, the most outspoken pro-life office holders, senators who championed federal legislation, and governors who signed into law state protections have sailed to re-election. At the same time, every ballot initiative on abortion since Dobbs has produced a resounding defeat for the pro-life cause. There are lessons here. With ballot initiatives, pro-abortion activists posing as media personalities control the messaging. The pro-life side is consistently outspent by wide margins. We even lose a portion of our natural base. In Ohio, 1/3 of voters who went to church at least once a week voted for abortion. This is why the pro-abortion side will continue to bring ballot initiatives in states that pass pro-life laws at the state house. It does the pro-life cause no good to pass a protective law at the state house that will be replaced with abortion on demand at the ballot box. Our goal needs to be not simply the most protective law possible now, but the most protective law that can withstand efforts to repeal it. We need simultaneously to take current political reality seriously and work to shape it for the future. Pro-lifers are for the most part locked out of or forced to be silent in every elite sector of society. The one venue in which you can be an outspoken pro-lifer and not pay a price is politics. And being outspoken here can help shape the future. We need political leaders not to run away from the abortion issue, but to speak about it intelligently, compassionately, and therefore boldly and persuasively. Courage has two opposing vices: cowardice and rashness. Sadly, we are seeing cowardice in the refusal of some pro-lifers to enact protective laws, and rashness in the refusal of others to make such laws sustainable. Taking moral and political reality seriously entails a recognition that we must uphold moral truth, but also shape political reality. And I'd highly recommend that you all go check out this thread and the attached article by Anderson. But I think he made a lot of really good points and really salient points. And this is the key, right? In other words, it's advocating for our policies, but doing it in an effective way in a democratic system, right? And I think there's a and what going back to the clip we saw, of Pastor Webben, is I think there are some Christians who want a shortcut, right? In other words, changing people's mind. Now, and first of all, I want to say there are pro-life organizations that do amazing work on the ground, changing hearts and minds, providing women access to ultrasound machines, right? Which statistically, right, the rates of abortion go drastically down after women see their child in the ultrasound. And so there's people doing tireless, often thankless work on the streets. So I don't want to throw any of these people under the bus. They're saintly. But there's some Christians who want to bypass. They're like, this democracy thing is kind of annoying, right? This constitutional system, right, is kind of annoying and burdensome, and it would be hard work to change people's mind in that system. So we want an end run around this hard work that Ryan talks about here, and we want to jump straight to the Caesar that will enforce our will, right? And I think we make a moral mistake, but also a tactical mistake when we do that.
Yep. And I think one thing that could help, even though it's a hard discussion for some people, is to show people. I've seen videos where when they show people who are pro-abortion, the you know the image of kids from sperm to fertilization to growth, and then they go beyond and then show what an abortion is like, that people actually change their mind because they had never visualized it. And that being said, I'm not going to show an abortion, but I am going to show this.
Development have a
Real
high
quick.
implantation potential once transferred into the uterine cavity. The blastocyst hatches out of its shell
Look at the
and burrow
beauty
into
of
the uterine
life.
wall,
here.
endometrium, which serves as the source of oxygen and nutrients. About 4 weeks from the beginning of the last period, near the next period, the blastocyst has
Look.
begun to produce the pregnancy hormone to tell your ovaries to stop releasing
If,
eggs.
if
From then on, the menstrual cycle
uninterrupted,
pauses.
that
The blastocyst is
becomes
called an embryo now.
a baby, a
Home pregnancy
human.
test might be able to get a positive result. At week 5, the
It
circulatory
doesn't
system,
look
brain, and
human
spinal cord
there,
are beginning to form,
but there we go.
and the tiny heart will start to beat. The baby's heart beats
Look at that.
about 54 million times before birth. The placenta provides oxygen and nutrients to the growing baby and removes waste products from the baby's blood via the umbilical cord. The nose, mouth, and ears are starting to shape at week 6.
Week 6.
At weeks 7 and 8, the embryo has doubled in size since last week's. Little hands and
Alien
feet start to
looking
grow.
thing, but
At
it's
week 9 to
human.
12 of pregnancy,
Looking like
the embryo is
ET,
called
but
a fetus.
now look at
The
that.
baby is almost fully
Each and
formed
every
and has
one of
completed the
us.
most critical portions.
This was
The facial
awesome.
features are more recognizable.
Yep.
The fetus's head is rotated and bent towards the chest, and he can occasionally touch his face. The diaphragm muscles start to grow. The reproductive, circulatory, and urinary systems are all at an advanced stage of development. The fetus will urinate in the amniotic sac. It is a sign of the proper functioning of the fetus's body.
Less
If the
than
baby is
2
a girl,
minutes.
her ovaries contain millions of eggs. If the fetus is a boy, his testicles will already start producing testosterone, male sex hormone, which is necessary for the development of his reproductive system. She or he is about 5 centimeters in size and 14 grams in weight. She or he is growing and maturing until ready to birth.
And I can't believe that there are times people advocate for full-term abortions in the 9th month, 8th month, when
Kennedy
they,
Jr.
yeah, when they look like this. As a father of 3 girls who actually delivered, obviously my wife gave birth, but I delivered all 3 of my girls with the help of uh, a nursemaid, a midwife, and to see the gift of life. How could anybody, some doctor, take some forceps and go in there and begin to crush the arms and rip off the arms and the legs and all that? And that happens when we lose our morality, we lose our religion. But then the opposite, as we've been talking about, is then when you try to force people's consciences. But the reason we are pro-life is because that falls under natural law. We are to protect the innocent. And what could be more innocent than a child? Joey, final thoughts as we wrap up this episode.
Yeah, I get so. My final thoughts, and we kind of got into this in a discussion we did on another channel with our buddy Ryan. But one thing that I think to the Christian nationalists and to those who think the answer is simply just grabbing more power and enforcing our will Constitution be damned right from the top down. The question I would have is, wouldn't we again, I wouldn't support that use of power anyway, but even in that worldview, wouldn't the moral thing to be to do everything else in your power before you jump to that extreme? And the thing is, look at the successful civil rights movement, right? Right, for against racial segregation, against racial discrimination. What did these people, the good ones, the nonviolent ones, Dr. King, do? Right, peaceful protest. He was willing to not hurting anybody, but to break unjust laws and to suffer the consequence and allow the people to see a man who was not violent, not confrontational, be arrested, right? He didn't fight back when they arrested him for sitting at the whites only counter. He went in jail. His famous letter, which is the letter from the Birmingham jail, which in my opinion is one of the best contemporary treatises on the natural law, right? He wrote it, again, the letter from the Birmingham jail. And here's the thing. How many of us, how many pro-lifers, how many Christians are willing to, after church on a Sabbath or a Sunday or after synagogue or whatever, go out with your church community to an abortion clinic and not be violent, but have a candlelight vigil, not approach anyone, not violently accost people, but any women who of their own volition come towards you? How many of you are willing to offer them help? Be like, listen, if you don't do this thing, I know there are people that do this work, but it's certainly of however many Christians are in America, it's probably less than a percentage of them do this work on a regular basis. Well, what if every pro-life Christian was willing to do that? And yes, guess what? There's a FACE Act. You're not allowed to do these things. You may get arrested. I've been to a few pro-life visuals, but I'm saying this to myself. I probably should be doing more, right? We all should be doing more. If we truly believe that what is happening, and I do, is the mass slaughter of innocent human beings, well, then let's do everything we can, right, within Christian means to bring attention to this and to call it out in a loving and, like Ryan was saying, compassionate way, even at risk to ourselves, right? Rather than be talking this obsession with power, right? What if the power of Christians is the power of the cross? It's the power of self-sacrifice. So if we really want to change minds, let's do that. This is just an idea I've had with some friends, and something I'd like to do this June is I'd like to find a couple of friends who are willing to go, not to fight with people, not to cause trouble, not to whatever, not to be mean, not to say God hates, certain groups of people, which is blasphemous and evil anyway, but to go to a gay pride march with gospel tracts, right? With, verses of encouragement of the love of God, and to share the gospel with people who are hurting, right? In other words, rather than, and this is another thing that's bothered me recently, is sometimes there's a way of covering some of the LGBT insanity, and it is insanity that we see in our culture, that makes us think that the LGBT sin is some sort of abstraction, and these are not hurting, broken, often sexually abused or traumatized people who are image bearers of God, who need the love of God to know that, guess what? Yes, you may not be living in accord with his will now, but there is grace and forgiveness, right? Maybe if we spent less time talking about these other groups of sinners as issues, and more about talking them as people to be reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ, maybe we'd see the revival that we so need in this country.
That's a good word to end on. We've gone over an hour, but I enjoyed it. God bless everyone. And until next time on the Gio and Joey show, be blessed.